Well, welcome everybody. Welcome to the third talk of our inaugural VCU Cybersecurity Center and CCI Central Virginia Node Eminent Speaker Series. Let me make sure that you can see my screen.
I can see it.
You can see it? Very good. My name is Miloš Manik. I'm professor of computer science department at Virginia Commonwealth University and director of VCU Cybersecurity Center. I'm also a CCI fellow, one of the fellows of inaugural class of CCI. That is one of the sponsors of today's event. After two very hot speakers in the field, William Austin and Eric Peterson, we are proud to present you Mr. Edward Rhyne, a leader who has successfully navigated his ways from engineering roots to top leadership positions. So Edward Rhyne is currently holding a position of Senior Technical Advisor of Cybersecurity, Energy Security, and Emergency Response, and among many well-known as CESER Office of Department of Energy. His specializations are really wide, ranging from cybersecurity materials, space and aeronautics, radio frequency mass spectrometry, medical diagnostics. Edward is currently leading programs at CESER that refer to threat mitigation portfolio. I will mention a few: cybersecurity for operational technology environment, consequence-driven, and cyber-informed engineering. Ed's previous position was with Department of Homeland Security, Science and Technology Directorate. Mr. Rhyne was technical advisor there. He led a number of programs, a number of domain name system security programs, spearheaded moving target defense, hardware-enabled trust programs. I'll just mention one more that has a nice acronym, INSTINCT. Mr. Rhyne piloted DHS S&T efforts in the Innovative Science and Technology in Counter Terrorism program within UK Home Office of Security Counter Terrorism, focusing on interestingly aviation security and augmented reality. If you look for Mr. Rhyne online, you will find various talks he's given. I specifically like this one that I'm showing here, where Pete Zeronis introduced him that Edward has spent 5 years at Johns Hopkins Applied Physics Lab and coming to us via ways of NASA, Case Western, Penn State, Johns Hopkins, and all the way via DHS to DOE. I'm going to hand over the mic to Mr. Rhyne. I'll just mention that you will be able to see the recording of today's talk in a few days on our VCU Cybersecurity Center, and we have a YouTube channel, so please subscribe. Ed, the floor is yours.
All right, great. Thanks, Miloš. So let me share the screen, and hopefully I got the right one.
Perfect.
All right, excellent, great. So yeah, I'm going to talk today about specifically cybersecurity for OT environments. The abstract was basically avoiding complacency in securing OT environments, and this really stemmed from the fact that traditionally cybersecurity is kind of met with regulations and compliance, and to me, compliance kind of takes away let's say some original thought and innovation, and it really does breed complacency. And we really don't want complacency when we're talking about security, because it is the antithesis of security. So what we've developed with CyOTE is a methodology or framework to really highlight, for better for loss of words, a public-private partnership. So, leveraging the fact that the asset owners in, what I'm going to talk about today specifically is in the electricity subsector, know their environments, but we, the government, may be able to provide some insights on threat analysis. And when you couple those two things together, and then you support it with data, that they pull from their environment, you might be able to attribute attack campaigns earlier, or discount them and actually say this is just an incidental failure of a device. So we'll get into that, but that's just a quick outline of what we're going to be talking about today. So what is the CyOTE program? I think everybody knows that the energy sector, life in general, has become more complex and interconnected. And, the line between IT and OT systems is blurring, pretty much as we speak. And there's a lot of OT systems that are available, on the open internet, which is, an issue. So, I think we need to realize that there are OT systems out there that are insecure, and we need to secure them better. And, because of that, adversaries are taking advantage of the fact that we have these systems out there. People are deploying connected OT systems because of convenience. You don't want to have to necessarily run out to the field every time you need to reset something or upgrade firmware, et cetera. So, these things are, there's benefits, but there's also burdens to making things increasingly connected. So to couple that, we know that the visibility and monitoring capability of OT environments is, a relatively new field per se, and it's somewhat immature. And initially people started to look at kind of IT tools and trying to redirect those into the OT environment, and they're just kind of not made for that, so they're not really doing a good job of that. But I think recently in the past 5, maybe 6 years, people have realized that and started to make OT specific tools, which is awesome. But what we decided to do in the CyOTE program was really start looking at, the model for security and the paradigm, and, realizing that the network and protocol analysis really is going to get us to move the needle on security as far as prevention or protection. So we want to start looking at security as being a holistic analysis of operations, the entire business operations, whether that's, even accounts payable, certainly your IT systems, certainly your OT systems, anything that your business is doing, could potentially be a signal that we could use to identify anomalies, but then also attribute those to an attack. So, CyOTE program, it's within CESER, the Office of CESER, which Milos mentioned about at the beginning. It is a partnership with the energy sector owners and operators, and it's intended to create a methodology that we've done, and we're rapidly getting ready to send this out to the industry to provide capabilities for the asset owners to implement and kind of exercise within their environment to better evaluate their own systems, whether it's production, transmission, or even distribution of energy. And one thing I hope that you take away from today's talk is that while we've developed this for the energy sector, specifically the electricity subsector, any industrial control system or even any control process control, this model will work for. So think about that as you hear some of these examples, and I go through what this methodology is. But again, the vision is really to develop a threat identification capability, not for the government, but for the energy sector asset owners and operators to independently identify. So that means within their own systems, they don't need us to actually identify the indicators of attack within their systems. Now we can help them, as far as, here's some adversary techniques or some observables that you may want to look for, but ultimately it's up to the asset owners to identify these and then start to associate multiple observables so that they can say, with confidence that this is an attack, and then call in incident responders or the appropriate authorities. So when we start talking about network environments, just to level set everybody, I look at the world as, of networks as being three basic realms. There's internet traffic, which is effectively beyond your corporate barrier, your corporate perimeter. So think of your gateway out. Then there's your internal IT network, which is effectively that space between your internet gateway and then your OT, DMZ, your jump boxes, etc. And when we talk about OT, operational technology networks, the deeper you go into it, the more and more devices you get. It really is the actuators, the things that move the energy or control the processes that you're looking to control. And as you start getting deeper into the stack, you see that there's a mix of traffic types. Whether it's TCP/IP or even serial. You start getting multiple layers to compound the issue of multiple devices, and in some cases it's even thousands or tens of thousands of devices, depending on how big the environment is. So this creates a lot of challenges, not the least of which is regulations, and with good intentions, for not providing information to our adversaries, we're limiting the amount of information or the types of information that can actually be shared. And while it's in one sense good, in another sense it actually is a hindrance to the defenders. So regulations in this case can be bad. It's a challenge for us to actually understand what's really going on. But again, this is another reason why to push a lot of the analysis and the identification of the anomalies into the asset owners, because they have this information. They just can't share it outside their perimeter. The geographic dispersion of assets in the field. Again, think about your transmission lines. They go everywhere, and some of them are very remote. The communications channel, is very, very limited, to say the least. So you're not going to have a big pipe, where you're going to get just gobs of data that you can analyze to come out of it. A common lexicon. There's a lot of different vendors that call the same type of data with different labels. And, this creates another challenge, not to mention the fact that threat information that's out there, you might be talking about a specific ABT, but they've got multiple different names. So it's really hard to have a conversation that everybody is on the same page right off the bat. So a common lexicon is a challenge. And then also, understanding the anomalies in operations. We found, in working with the asset owners, that there are fairly large divides between the security folks, the InfoSec folks, and the operations folks. And the operations guys, their job is to go and make sure the energy flow is working and reliable. They're not necessarily thinking about security. So when they have to go out and reset a relay, they're not really thinking, oh, I just did this yesterday, that's odd. No, they might, but they're not really necessarily telling anybody. And then who would they tell? But that's what we want to really start to drill into, is the fact that as you see more of these anomalies, if you understand how they can be linked and related to adversary techniques, this is an opportunity to start identifying attack campaigns earlier in the process, with, in theory, diminishing returns for the attackers. So one common kind of theme that has been coming up recently is putting sensors everywhere. And while this is actually not bad, sensors really only see what they're exposed to, and certainly as part of the solution, they're going to provide a lot of information. Unfortunately, information without context does not promote any understanding. And with a lot of information that you may or may not even need, we've actually found that in some instances where we've had a lot of data coming in from not full coverage of the space with sensors, but we've dropped 99.99% of the data. So really we have signal to noise issues, and that's a burden not only on the analyst but also on the transportation layer. How are you getting that data to your analyst? Again, thinking about the geographic dispersion, you might not have a big pipe. Communication channels are going to be somewhat limited. So how are you going to get all that data back? You know, you don't really necessarily want to build infrastructure when you don't necessarily need to have all that information coming back. So an example of, you know, why sensors everywhere are part of the problem, or part of the solution, I should say, is, you know, what is this line? You know, it's just kind of a line. Yeah, okay. Let's add another sensor and see if we can figure out what it is. Oh, another line. For those of you old enough, you know, maybe this is Pong. I don't know. Let's add another sensor. Oh, we got a letter and a punctuation mark. Now we're starting to get somewhere. Could it be a sentence? Maybe. Let's add more sensors and see what we get. Ah, there we go. It is a sentence. And it's, shall we play a game? Okay, kind of innocuous, right? But those of us that are, you know, children of the 80s or watch movies from the 80s know that this phrase actually means something. And if you see it on your screen, it's probably not the best thing to see. So having sensors everywhere, while they help, it's not the solution. And it's part of the solution. And you have to have the required corollary to sensors everywhere, which is everything is a sensor. And once you realize that, then you start to be able to understand the context of the information you're getting. And then if you start seeing anomalies in what you expect, then you can start to look at the data you're getting from the sensors, the information you're getting from them, to see if you can actually test a hypothesis of the activity being malicious versus just something breaks. So, you know, really it's the intersection of identifying the anomalies and then understanding the underlying context that provides securing your OT environment. And this is where I think we need to break away from this, you know, compliance regime of, you know, well, if I put sensors here, here, and here, I'll be good. Nope, you still have to understand what your system is supposed to be doing. You, the asset owners, or the people that are responsible for that process, have to understand really what's intended to happen. So to add context, you know, specifically for OT environments, you know, there's a lot of things that we can take advantage of. The OT predictability, you know, the processes for large portion, you know, of the process we deal with, you know, they act predictably and they have statefulness to them. So you can go back to a certain state if you need to. So these are things that we should be able to take advantage of. And also understanding the difference between OT and IT, you know, again, you know, thinking back in the early days of trying to redeploy IT tools in OT environments really didn't help too much because, you know, IT tools were looking at the problem vastly differently. You know, if you think about IT networks, you know, there's effectively, you know, infinite behaviors because, you know, everybody's going to behave differently behind the keyboard. But in large portion, there's kind of finite protocols that you're going to see in an enterprise environment. You know, everybody's got their web traffic, they're going to have their emails, you know, maybe some file shares if your organization allows it, but, you know, it's pretty finite. Whereas in OT networks, the behaviors themselves are finite. You know, there's, again, the predictability plus the devices, they have very specific actions that they can take. So relays can be either on or off. Pumps have upper and lower bounds that can be set. Unfortunately, you have effectively infinite protocols because every implementation you can customize, even standard you can implement differently. Every vendor is going to have their own way of doing, you know, potentially, you know, proprietary protocols. So there's, you know, it flips the kind of security paradigm, if we're a behavior paradigm, and you've got infinite behaviors in IT and finite protocols. In OT, it flips it around completely, and you've got finite behaviors with infinite protocols effectively. So to help us understand, you know, and take advantage of some of these things, you know, we started looking at use cases and, you know, trying to understand from the asset owners themselves, you know, that have the full knowledge of their systems far better than we ever will as the government, and should actually. You know, if they can start to identify the anomalies and say, you know, this is kind of odd by itself, maybe not an issue, but if it happens again and again, or if I can relate to other things, then it's certainly worth investigation and I'll need to understand it. So this really kind of outlines the approach for CyOTE, which is, you know, really starting with anomalous operational behavior and then identifying that as kind of a triggering event. What would you need to see to do further analysis? And, you know, the triggering events can be, you know, physical, you know, so, you know, transformer fails over and over again, or you're getting a bigger demand down the line that you really hadn't been before. And there's nothing that's changed down the line, so you really wouldn't expect that. Or it can actually be cyber, so you have, kind of an increased number of login attempts from outside your network or from anywhere actually, or you've lost control of something, or things start to reboot and you don't really necessarily know why. And that's kind of a gray space between the physical and the cyber. But again, we're not assuming that everything is cyber or malicious actually. And, these can be incidental as well. And we've run through some case studies applying this methodology where we've actually gone through and we've shown that it actually was a device failure, even though everybody thought it was malicious. So you're not assuming that everything's malicious, and this methodology will help you get to that answer faster, we hope. But once you have the operational behavior, the correlation of the data, so getting the information from the sensors is vastly important, because you can then provide that evidence to say that something actually is going on here. And we needed to tie it again to a common lexicon. We chose the MITRE ATT&CK framework for ICS that identified the tactics, techniques, and procedures so that we could start talking a common language when we start talking about attacks and saying, here, we've seen evidence of this technique and this technique in our environments. Has anybody else seen it? So now you start to be able to enable kind of this collective defense notion. But, having, the anomalous behavior and correlating data, you still need to have a way of, evaluating it, effectively. And, one direction that we went into was thinking, if you have certain events that happen and they happen, shall I say, simultaneously or serially, that would be a very good indicator that there's something malicious going on in your environment. And we zeroed in on 3, I'll call them use cases, but they're really more like lenses to focus attention. And that's on, alarm logs. So if you have alarms going off and there's some anomalous activity, as far as the alarms go off, you may want to look into some of these. And we've identified triggering events for those. The HMI, the human machine interface, if changes are happening to that, again, by itself may not be a problem, but if it's unauthorized or not coming from the control center, that could be indicative of a problem. And same thing with remote logins. Pick your favorite Pakistan country. If you start seeing remote logins coming from there, it may be a problem. It may not. You might do business with that country, but this is where we can't set universal triggers for everybody to follow, because your specific environment, your own business practices, your own business risk tolerance is going to effectively dictate where you're going to say, I've seen enough. This is a big enough risk. I want to investigate it. And then we've developed several case studies to really kind of highlight the approach that we've developed with CyOTE, and gone through several historical attack campaigns and identified the techniques, as well as some of the observables that were missed or discounted early on in the attack that could have prevented the attack from going on. But for whatever reason, whether it was silos in an organization, or the operations folks saying, "No, my job is just to reset this. I'm just going to ignore it because I did my job. Nothing wrong here." But the idea was to illustrate that we can actually start to detect attack campaigns, and this is key, with ever decreasing impacts. If you think about some malware that may create an admin account to change settings on something, if the creation of an admin account doesn't correlate to the hiring of a new admin, this could be an indicator that there's something strange going on. Again, mostly innocuous by itself. I mean, it could just be somebody testing something, whatever. But, again, these are things that, by itself, probably innocuous, coupled with other things, you may want to take a look at it. So the 3 use cases, really with the remote logins, HMI, and alarm logs, we weren't saying that, if we see something in any one of these, that it's necessarily a problem. But the integration, the concurrence events, if you have somebody detecting anomalous behavior in a remote login, environment or filter, and you have an HMI anomalies or triggering events, and you have alarm logs. The fact that these things are occurring simultaneously or again within time series really does indicate that you have a problem. These things shouldn't happen concurrently. So with that lens, we really started talking to the asset owners as well as the folks at Idaho National Lab to take the use cases, identify from the MITRE ATT&CK framework which techniques could be associated to each use case. So for, say remote login, we identified, a dozen or so techniques that could be identified with that. And then we took it deeper to say, okay, if you had those techniques that are associated with those use cases, what data sources and data fields would you need to actually support the existence of that technique? And again, this is, idealized. But then we took it to the asset owners and said, okay, if you had these triggering events that you've identified, and you saw that you had these techniques potentially identified, what of these data sources would you actually be able to collect today? And we got a list of those. And then it was, what could you actually collect, but you don't yet because it's, your devices aren't configured for it, or you just haven't taken the time to start bringing that signal back. But then we also got into the, what can't you collect without new tools or with new infrastructure? So that kind of put us into a direction of, maybe we can actually start to test this theory, this hypothesis of, this intersection of these three use cases providing some value to the asset owners. So again, within the use cases, we asked them multiple questions, and we developed these the outputs over several months. And what scenarios within these areas would actually create a trigger event, or what would be the anomalies? So for login events, it was, have multiple people started to log in quick succession from outside your environment or from areas that you wouldn't expect. And, for HMI, have settings been changed, not from the control room or unauthorized times or, outside the bounds of what you would normally expect, which would then cause an alarm log anomaly. And if we think about one of our case studies that we did was actually the Ultimate water breach from February. And, thinking about that historically, somebody remoted in, early in the morning, moved the mouse, and then just went away. So there's an observable that could have actually stopped what happened at, I think it was 1:30 in the afternoon then, where they came in, moved the mouse again, actually changed the HMI. And the only reason why there wasn't an alarm log event was because the operator was sitting there watching the mouse move and saw the value change and then quickly changed it back. So, had that operator been out getting coffee or, away from his desk, we would have had all three of those use cases, have triggering events or anomalies that could have shown that absolutely there was something going on. So having the triggering events is important. Do you have the data to support any of the analysis? This is also important. So in this case, with Ultimar, they did, and they actually saw that it was credentials that were harvested from, a breach that had happened. So they were legitimate credentials. So that, you can see the anomaly was, hey, we had our data breached, and it was posted publicly. Then you had, the anomalies of somebody moving a mouse, so there was evidence that you could have actually stopped this. Luckily it was stopped before anything really bad happened, but it just shows the value of this, in my opinion. But anyway, so getting back to the data, what do you collect now and what don't you? And then are there things that would limit your ability to analyze the data as far as, do you not have the infrastructure to bring data back from the field in near real time? Would you have to go download it, bring it on SneakerNet? And then also, do you have tools or other commercial tools that are not available to identify these techniques within the data that you're receiving, and the DOE should focus on development for the tools. So with our newly found appreciation of what data was available, and our techniques tied to these observables and triggering events, we decided to just show, what was the coverage that we would have on the MITRE ATT&CK framework. And 82% of the techniques on the MITRE ATT&CK framework were identified or potentially could be identified using any one of the 3 use cases. Now, you don't have to read necessarily what the techniques are, but all the colored boxes show that these were potentially associated with any one of the use cases. The boxes that have the 3 colors, those actually were evident in all 3 of the use cases, and there's about 22 of them or so. So, I think we believe we were onto something because of the fact that we had such large coverage of the techniques, and our assumption of if you have these 3 use cases happening simultaneously, that there's a problem. So we started developing tools. These are not meant to supplant commercial tools. It's actually really meant to complement them. And most of the tools that we developed were not plug and play tools. They were more of here's a way that you can actually pull these from your environment and then make sense of what you're actually pulling from your environment. So they weren't tools in the case of I'm just going to install it into my system. We weren't looking to create. We're not a software shop. We're not a tool development shop. But once these are actually deployed, you can couple that with any information you've got from commercial tools to aid in this kind of correlation of these techniques to say, we've identified a technique with some observables. Are there any others? And this ability to start linking these is actually very important, and understanding really this, how you can associate techniques, whether it's through time series, so if these things happen in quick succession, or through other associations, whether it's geographic or even on a specific vendor type. It may indicate that there's somebody that has great knowledge of pick your favorite vendor's equipment, and they're just going after these things in your environment. So it shows graphically, when you start to string the techniques together, the blue is, what do you have that's available and that you can correlate? The yellow is, if we had, data available, we couldn't find anything on a commercial tool that was actually correlating these, but, the CyOTE program was able to, help the asset owners write their own scripts so they could pull out the data and then identify the techniques. That's the yellow. The red is really, here's some gaps that need to be addressed, and they can either be addressed by us. We'll work with security vendors, but it doesn't really matter if you have the full visibility, because really part of this question is, what amount of visibility do you actually need to evaluate the string of anomalies with high confidence that you're under attack? And again, this really is a question for each independent enterprise or asset owner, in their own risk posture or risk tolerance, as well as their own capabilities. But having a way to identify these and start stringing them together, associate them, is powerful. So then you can start to then help the incident responders when they do come in, whether they're internal or external, to find where the malicious activity was coming from and get it out. So, I mentioned some case studies, and from a historical perspective, we looked at the tactics, techniques, and procedures across many of the well-documented attacks to look for commonalities. And what we found was that the initial access, the footholds, they were changing, and whether it was a watering hole attack or phishing email or whatever, these by and large are kind of unique to a specific campaign. The middleware, however, the ability for the attackers to move laterally in your environment and discover things within your environment these largely are have some commonalities. And this was just fascinating because it really started to prioritize where we need to start looking, and not necessarily in the network and protocol analysis, but also for observables. And that's really the key to going forward with CyOTE, is the tying this to the observables that the operators can actually see, and then having them start to tell the InfoSec people, hey, go do the network protocol analysis or get the incident responders to do that, so that we can back this up with evidence that yes, this is malicious, or no, it's just actually a broken part. So graphically, going back to the MITRE tech framework, again, don't worry about the words, but the colors are the important part. So on the left is really your, kind of initial access, how you're getting into the network. This middleware part that I'm talking about, right underneath the word software, you start to see boxes with many, many colors. And that's where I'm saying that, we have some evidence that there are some common techniques across many of the historical attacks. And, this was pretty insightful, and it helps us to prioritize this. And as well as say, if we can start to move the needle on security, we're going to start seeing some of these things actually become more one-offs and change the math for the adversaries, which is going to be great. Mapping the historical attacks can be complicated. This is a campaign mapping of an actual campaign. There's 15 different steps that were taken, and you can see the progression across this framework, that each one of these had observables that could have been, say, identified and paid attention to, and stopped the attack campaign from going any further. So, it's not trivial, but, hopefully the methodology and the tools and the procedures we're outlining will actually help with making it more reasonable to follow. So again, it really gets down into the risk model for each asset owner, and how much visibility do you really need to see within your organization before you initiate an incident response. And it doesn't have to be calling the cavalry. It's really more of your incident response can be any manner of flavor that you are comfortable with. And as you start to peel away the layers of the onion, you may want to actually have a different response, which is absolutely acceptable. Identifying the tools that you would need to actually help in the assessment, and how you would start to string this diagram together to start to say, with confidence, and I've seen 3 or 4 techniques, this is a problem. I'm not comfortable with this. I want to actually understand this better, because it could be either a historical, campaign, or somebody's using malware against me that's been known, or, potentially even you're in the middle of a brand new attack that nobody's actually identified yet, but you can get in front of it and stop it before they actually have the larger impacts that they want. And, part of the strength of this approach is that it's actually applicable to, not only the large, well-resourced asset owners that have, their own InfoSec teams or multiple teams. It really does provide value to the small operators as well. So the munis and the co-ops, that might have one person that's in charge of their, digital environment, let's say, because if they can start to identify the anomalies and the observables, and then start to link them together with other anomalies, they're starting to build that diagram where they might not have the digital evidence, the network and protocol evidence to support that, there was actually a malicious traffic in driving that observable, or that observance of that technique, but they can show that there is smoke, let's say. There might not be fire, but there's certainly smoke. And they can then start to help the incident responders when they come in, because they've now focused their attention. And they can then go start right from those anomalies and then start to build that digital evidence from their own capabilities, their own tools, based on your kind of initial assessment hopefully shortening the time to say, yes, we're in the middle of something, and no, they haven't actually done anything bad. So what we're intending to do with CyOTE is a streamlined approach for companies to identify anomalous activity, and then help them determine whether or not it's actually potential indicators of attack in their environment. And the use case participation, has already kind of provided some value to folks, because it's forced them to start to reach across these silos in their own organization and say, I never thought about collecting this data, or having the operators tell me when they go out and reset relays. I never knew how to get that information, or even whether it was important to me, but now I see that if it's happening 5 times more this week than it did all of last year, that could be indicative of something going on. And then, with the common lexicon, learning how other companies are tackling, their own identification of their own monitoring challenges, but then also being able to talk across and say, yeah, we link this technique with this technique through this method, that's also quite valuable. And then, having this prioritization effect, so when we start looking at the historical attacks or looking at, what commercial capabilities are, this has really started to help prioritize, not only our efforts, but also the asset owners as well. Some final thoughts then. I think I'm just about right on time. We are looking to kind of change the paradigm, for security, and start thinking about it as, not just network and protocol analysis, but wrapping in, the operational data and anomalies from those, understanding of how your system is supposed to work. Anything that deviates from that could potentially be an early indicator. And the earlier we identify these and get ahead of it, the better we'll be at trying to stop these at early stages. And if we can stop an attack with just the creation of an admin account, then in my opinion, we win. Because we haven't been able to go any further, and the consequence of having an extra admin account that you've already deleted is pretty trivial. But correlating the operational anomalies with the attack techniques, again, having these decreasing impacts is gonna move the needle with security, and we have to be able to get there. So it's not just the sensors and providing information; it's actually correlating that information with some context, so that you can have a greater understanding as to what's really going on. So I know not everybody here is in the electric subsector or even an asset owner, but I think everybody has increasingly control over, some sort of process control, whether it's even in your house or, maybe, a company that you deal with, exercising this methodology, and then understanding that, when anomalies happen, it may just be, something breaks, or it could actually be something else, but having the ability to start saying, oh, well, maybe this is related to this, and then it could be indicative of something else. Hopefully not in your house, but for any process control, I think this actually can help to kind of get ahead of, where we are now with security, and also, kind of change the way that we look at security from, getting more into the prevention and protection, and away from more of an incident response, even though this is incident response, but just to smaller incidents to respond to. And I believe that's it. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Ed. I wish we were doing this in person to give you a big round of applause.
Thank you.
You touch upon so many issues that I don't even know where to start. I'm sure questions will keep on coming in. I especially liked when, I think it was slide 10, when you said everything is a sensor. So in OT, well, in general, even cyber savvy techies don't always recognize that everything really is a sensor. Everything communicates with something. And now when you look at it through the prism of IT with infinite behaviors, as I say, and OT with finite yet infinite protocols implementation, now it gets really interesting. So while we're waiting for questions, can you elaborate on maybe some cases that are possible to elaborate where things went wrong because the operator or anyone involved just dismissed a device that is talking to another, and then things went bad, or some case scenarios we should be aware of when introducing new devices on the network?
Yeah, so I think so outside of the Oldsmar breach, where the mouse moved and the operator saw it but didn't do anything until after the HMI was changed, several hours later. We have seen in early stages of the effort some traffic analysis show that there was a device that was reset, and within a very short amount of time, it reestablished all of its connections with its downstream actuators. And this was evident from the traffic analysis, and this was before we actually kind of solidified on the methodology of starting with the observables. And then it was, well, okay, what would actually cause this to happen? And there's some discussion about, oh well, it could have been a hurricane. Yeah, okay. Where else did that hurricane go? And was the substation upstream, or the next substation in line over that hurricane, did that have the same, behavior? No. Okay, well, maybe there's something else. Oh, what date was that? Yeah, I think we had a data center fire. That would do that. Yeah, it would. What else is in that data center? Oh, well, these devices here, did they lose their connections? No. Okay, well, what's next? Then it was, well, maybe, somebody updated the firmware. Did they? No. Okay. So there's all these possibilities, again, and this is where I think as we do more of these historical analyses, we're going to build a library of observables per technique, let's say, so that as you start to see observables, you can then go back and kind of, cross-reference, okay, here are the techniques. So that as you see things, you'll build, okay, it could be these and these techniques. But then as you see the next anomaly, it's these other techniques, but maybe there's some overlap with two. Well, now you've just reduced your subset to two more. So had we done that from the initial one on that traffic kind of bloom, if you will, they would have said, oh, well, there was, somebody kicked the cord and it lost power. And then, okay, well, that's an anomaly, innocuous, but then when you plug it in, oh, by the way, there's digital evidence that there's something going on that, could be malicious because it could have been somebody remotely, reflashing the firmware. If that answered your question.
That really does. You are now touching upon a topic that's really dear to my heart, which is correlating of data from multiple data sources. But I'll wait for a second and give a mic to Craig Rieger for INL to ask a question. I'm assuming he's going to ask that. Craig, the mic is yours.
Thank you, Miloš. So, Ed, appreciated your presentation. Certainly, you're doing many things that align with my interests and my interest areas. But I have a specific question, and so I could go down either the more autonomous mitigation mode, but I think I'll start just with the human. And specifically, and I'm sure you believe this, the cyber feedback loop needs to come into being because we need to reduce the time scale of response. Now, that's a scary concept for anybody that works in the OT space because we really don't necessarily, even with lots of sensing, we don't have 100% confidence, and we really don't know all the potential things that we would have to modify our environment, as well as if we don't have high confidence, what things we could do to mitigate. But I think that the step before that is how do we make the humans more effective? How do we help them at their job? And so my specific question is, what are your thoughts relative to integrating the cyber defender and what they would see on a SIM and an operator with what they would see on an HMI, which is all about physical, as compared to cyber, which is all about cyber defender, which is all about cyber. What are your thoughts on moving that direction and synergistically providing the analytical information to both of them in near real time? What's that progression going to look like?
Yeah, that is going to be a challenge, and I think everybody is under-resourced and overtaxed on time and other things to say, yes, I'll pick up something new in my job. But I think if you're responsible for let's start with the networking folks, the InfoSec guys. If you're responsible for maintaining the communications and the connectivity on a process, you have to have some knowledge of that process. So saying, oh well, that's the operator, the guy that controls the HMI, that's his job. Yes, but you have to understand it. And I think we have to get to the point where we have this cross training or this reversal of these specializations. And I think having some more generalists, especially when you start talking about your security folks, if there was more generalization and you had, yes, deep knowledge in your area for the network and protocol analysis, but also not a baseline, but some knowledge of how things are supposed to work, you'd be able to short circuit that time frame. And same thing with the HMI, folks, if they start seeing things that are coming across their their desktop that just don't seem right, or if their machine starts to reboot, this could be a problem. So they should know that these things are anomalous, and they should call attention to somebody that has that specialty. But again, having that awareness that there's more things than just is the process being controlled correctly. Same thing with like the field operators. If your job is to go out and reset a relay, and you do that 5 times a week, good for you. But if you start doing it 50 times a week, that's not only putting a burden on you, but upstream. And this is beyond even the technical side of the house. If you need to send somebody out 10 times more often, they're probably not going to be able to do that in the same amount of time. So you're going to have to hire new people. So now that anomaly is starting to affect other areas of your business. HR is going to have to be involved. And I think the days of the heads of departments sitting around a boardroom table every day and saying, hey, we need to hire 5 more guys to go reset relays, somebody would have asked why. I don't think those discussions actually happen anymore because of time or whatever. I think there's reasons that these things don't happen. Maybe it's over specialization, I don't know. But I think having, and this is a roundabout way to answer your question, but having this cross training and awareness of what's going on outside of your area within the organization is going to be paramount to having any of these work.
Okay. Do you see that the SIM is going to start integrating more physical consequence information, and vice versa? The operator HMI are going to include some context on cyber as compared to just pure physical going forward?
Yeah, I do. And then I think having some of the, getting to your other kind of question with the automated response, having some of the, digital twin discussions and the, AI and ML, models come into play. If you start to have, high fidelity models, these are by definition going to be integrated, so you're going to have the networking, aspects come in with the physics, and because all of these things are going to be tied into your AI model. And, then if you have, your AI model and you have confidence in it, you might actually be able to have some automated responses to kind of reverse the effects of, let's say, an HMI change that was unauthorized, to buy you some time in, kind of powering through or operating through, so that you can then find the source and then get rid of it without any type of actual impact. because the automated response has been able to kind of counter that, providing the, for lack of a better term, the noise canceling signal so that your operations continue.
Thank you.
Thank you, Edward. We have a question from Robert Powell. Rob, go ahead, unmute yourself, introduce and ask.
Great. Hey, Ed. Rob Powell. I'm the Senior Advisor for Mission Cybersecurity with NASA. Good talk. I enjoyed it. So curious, any thoughts you have on the large scale, like home consumer perspective, right? So we have more and more smart homes, smart devices, Nest, Google Home, what have you, where you of course have a device that can be remotely controlled. And for me, one example as a homeowner that always stands out is my monthly cost of heating and cooling, right? And so are you seeing any increased adversary interest in manipulating those devices or malware geared towards those end user smart home type devices?
I mean, there's increased interest. I mean, so if you remember back to like the Mirai botnet, it wasn't necessarily to manipulate the devices, but it was more to kind of have them act as one and do the denial of service attacks. But I think as we get deeper and deeper into this remote environment, I've long believed that the easiest way into an enterprise is through the remote worker. And now that everybody's remote, I think there's going to be more and more interest in looking at some of these devices as a pathway. As far as changing the kind of the properties or the processes that they control, I don't know of any increased attention. I've heard some anecdotes of one-off saying my air conditioning got shut off because I had a specific thermostat that had a vulnerability when I changed the picture, the background picture on the thermostat, that opened the back door. But again, that's really kind of an isolated event, hopefully.
Roger that.
But, again, I was just going to say, with going back to that whole AI, there's a lot of technologies coming into homes that could actually help to identify when things are going kind of amiss. Even if it's just increased network traffic. Like myself, I've got probably 5 different physical networks at home based on the different functions of each kind of enclave. I'll look at the traffic to say, is this out of bounds, or does this make sense for this type of work? And beyond the network and protocol analysis of that, there are products now that have AI and ML models in them to even look at your electrical usage. So you mentioned your heating and air conditioning. They're there for more maintenance. So if you start to see the duty cycle of your air conditioning go up, it could be time to call the maintenance or to replace it. There's things that are you can put into your main service and identify when lights go on and what the manufactured light is based on the dynamic response of that for lack of a better term inrush current for that light bulb. So it's kind of an exciting time, but yeah, no increase in malicious activity that I'm aware of.
Well, behavior analysis is what caused a problem with solar starts. So this is a time where I'd like to ask you about at least half of computer science department at VCU and significant number of faculties at ECE department are very AI, ML, deep learning oriented when it comes to cybersecurity. Do you have some guidance, some suggestions from your perspective or perspective of CESER office for younger professors and students in this area, where to go, what is future bringing, how to orient ourselves in light of everything that's going on?
Yeah, so I think there's been in the past, I'll say two years, maybe 3, a fairly interesting trend towards, these, digital twins. And not all digital twin is created equal. Models are all wrong. It's just a matter of how much do you want to tolerate the assumptions that are made.
That's right.
And I think the closer you can get to, the way something is designed, so in other words, if you're building an AI model and you haven't talked to the vendor to build it, or the designers and built it, thanks, but no. I mean, this gets into the discussion of, if you don't know the system that, if you don't know how the system is supposed to work, how are you going to actually defend it? And how are you going to build a model to actually represent how that's supposed to work?
If you don't know the baseline, what's outside of baseline then?
Yeah,
or normal.
It's more than just but it's got to go beyond the empirical, right? You can't just say, "Oh, I've looked at 5 months or a year of operations." You really have to look at the design parameters as well as the empirical to say, as things age, how is it supposed to behave? And I think once we start to get those higher fidelity models with the input from the vendors themselves, that's going to be a really interesting time.
Well, regretfully, we're at the end of the hour, which was our allotted time for this talk. Please join me in thanking Mr. Rhyne in giving us this talk. Thank you very much, Ed. For everyone, please.
It was fun.
Thank you so much. For everyone joining, please visit our VCU Cybersecurity Center website. Please visit it often. And now we will move to a closed executive session. So thank you very much and see you at the next talk.